President Trump doubling down on his criticism of Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings and his district in Baltimore.
This as Democrats use the feud for their latest attack on President Trump.
Mark Meredith joins us live in Washington with more on the battle over Baltimore. Mark.
Good morning, Jeff. President Trump has tweeted several times about Maryland Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings and Cummings' district. The latest tweet coming overnight, I want to show it to you. The president wrote, quote, "So sad that Elijah Cummings has been able to do so little for the people of Baltimore. Statistically, Baltimore ranks last in almost every major category." Congressman Cummings was born and raised in Baltimore. He's represented his district since 1996. On Saturday, he fired back, also on Twitter, writing, quote, "Mr. President, I go home to my district daily. Each morning I wake up and I go fight for my neighbors. It is my constitutional duty to conduct oversight of the executive branch, but it is my moral duty to fight for my constituents." House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls Cummings a champion for civil rights. She also was on Twitter writing, quote, we all reject racist attacks against him and support his steadfast leadership." Now, this back and forth comes after a Republican strategist was on Fox and Friends Saturday discussing what she found in the Baltimore area.
The conditions in his own district, and a lot of people said he hasn't even been there in a while, are atrocious. There's abandoned row homes filled with trash, homeless addicts, empty needles that they have used, and it's really right next door.
Baltimore's mayor is also pushing back, calling the president's comments completely unacceptable. And real quick, guys, just want to show you, this is the front page here of the Baltimore Sun, which is the hometown newspaper there in Baltimore. It says Trump blasts city and Cummings. This story, though, getting a lot of attention, not just in Baltimore, but really all over the country. Guys, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. You know, this is a feud back and forth, which, of course, Nancy Pelosi and others, as they've done in the past, always will say, well, President Trump's a racist. This is what, you know, he's making this about race. When, if you step back and look at the conditions in West Baltimore, I'm not from there, but I know folks from there. You saw that report there. Whether it's education rates, whether it's crime rates, it's a systemic culture of poverty. They've trapped a lot of people there who feel like they're left behind. You talk about forgotten men and women. It's the men and women there who deserve the same choice and opportunity that anyone in America does. And that's the critique President Trump made in the campaign that I think he's making here as well. If you've represented that district for 10, 20 years, I don't know exactly how long it's been, and you're not doing everything outside the box to make it better there, are you doing enough?
Well, so Elijah Cummings' congressional district, the 7th District of Maryland, is a large district. It has Baltimore, parts of West Baltimore, and above it. So to be clear, we're not talking specifically just about Baltimore, but that is his area, and West Baltimore is a part of it. It all got thrust into the national conversation in the wake of the Freddie Gray riots that we saw in 2015. But if you look today, the homicide rate is up 18%, all right, compared to last year. You have 184 homicides so far this year compared to 156 last year. That's the 18% increase. If you look at non-fatal shootings in Baltimore from 2018 to 2019, you have a 31% increase, and perhaps some of what Kimberly Klasick that was on that Mark referenced was showing are some of the harshest hit areas. And, you know, unfortunately, West Baltimore has challenges, the same challenges that we saw 4 years ago.
Yeah, obviously there are parts of Elijah Cummings' district that are beautiful that this doesn't apply to, but there are parts that this does apply to. And, you know, I would just caution any debate that happens on Twitter. I've said this since day one, is that when you try to engage issues like this on Twitter, which President Trump often does, I know he feels like he's reaching to the heart of the people, but sometimes you have to be really careful with how you word stuff, because when I read the tweet initially and I saw things like no human being would want to live here, you have to be sensitive, even if you're well-intentioned and you're trying to draw attention to the fact that, listen, there are people that feel like they're left behind, that they are forgotten, and you feel like you're being a voice in a sense for those people when their elected representatives in many cases have, in a sense, abandoned those areas and not really given the due diligence that they should to those areas. I understand that intention, but sometimes it doesn't read necessarily that way. And you have to realize there are people that are living there, and they may not be able to just pick up and say, you know what, stuff's going down here, I'm going to pick up and leave. And maybe they don't want to. Maybe they love Baltimore and they are fighting very hard every day to have their elected representatives hear them. So I would just be careful about having debates like this on social media, as always.
Well, they're never complete enough because they're in 135 characters, but he brings attention to it in his own way, and he believes giving voice to people who have been voiceless for a long time, including one Baltimore resident who, this was going around social media yesterday, talked to the cameras about Elijah Cummings and his feud with President Trump. Listen to her.
He has never done anything for not even one person that I know of. I never heard anybody say anything about him. And people want to talk about Donald Trump this, Donald Trump that. Why is this man over there taking care of people at the border? We hungry. We need a place to stay. And it's just sad. He worried more about them than his own people. It breaks my heart to see this.
When you're in Washington a long time, you can start to have that feeling that you're the chairman of the Oversight Committee, you're doing all this, but are you fighting for economic opportunity zones? Are you fighting for charter schools?
Yeah.
Are you fighting for the things that lift people out of their situations and give them a better choice?
Yeah, I think this is key, actually, to hear from the residents, because you can hear from politicians all you want, and people argue a lot of times that politicians go into Washington, D.C., they become part of this political machine, and this applies to Democrats and Republicans alike, and they forget the people that elected them. They forget those local issues because they become so embroiled in national politics, especially as we approach an election season. So Elijah Cummings is out there talking about issues of the border and talking about these national issues a lot. And this may have been a way for residents of that district to redirect his attention and say, hey, listen,
that resident actually talked about that.
About us.
Said, you're talking about the border and the conditions on the border all the time. What about the conditions here?
Well, and, you know, so you have a good point about whether this should even be debated in social media, and a lot of people feel that the president was wrong to go after Elijah Cummings in this way because Elijah Cummings was affected personally from the scars of segregation when they were dealing with the go home tweets.
But that doesn't put you off limits forever on this discussion.
As long as we're having it, it's worth pointing out whether or not hypocrisy exists in this debate that's now unleashed. And if you look back to 2015, I mentioned the Freddie Gray riots. President Obama, let's show you this headline from the New York Post, April 28, 2015. Obama calls Baltimore riots, quote, criminals and thugs. And then, of course, this Baltimore Sun headline from December 8th, 2015. Bernie Sanders likens West Baltimore to a third world country.
Well, was that racist, Bernie Sanders?
This is a reaction Bernie Sanders had to the fallout.
He walked through the neighborhood in that time frame. We talked with residents, visited.
Here is Sanders in his own words.
Anyone who took the walk that we took around this neighborhood would not think you're in a wealthy nation. You would think that you were in a third world country. What we're talking about is a community in which half of the people don't have jobs. We're talking about a community in which there are hundreds of buildings that are uninhabitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and once again,
like,
I don't think this came at all from a racist place.
Of course not.
At all. I think Bernie Sanders was trying to draw attention to a reality and trying to speak in a sense for those people, saying, listen, what's going on in this area of Baltimore is not good for the people of Baltimore who are there, who are trying to get the attention of elected officials. I have a national platform. Let me go out and make that case. I do think it's better to do it, though, vocally in front of a camera.
Why is that better? I mean, it's just a new medium. Yeah, it's the way he communicates.
I'll tell you, it's limited. You often are when you're on those social media outlets, you're often inclined to just, vomit out words. You say something, you can't take it back once it's out there.
Sure you can. He can't take back those words from Bernie Sanders. He said it on camera. You tweet something, you can correct it if you want to.
Though. You hear the tone of his voice, you hear the inflection in Bernie Sanders' voice.
I just think we're arguing over a medium as opposed to the substance, which the substance is they make the same critique, and Bernie Sanders wants socialism, government-run everything in order to solve the problems of West Baltimore. Yeah. President Trump would say, I want economic opportunity zones. By the way, Elijah Cummings was not a co-sponsor of the Investing in Opportunity Act, which are opportunity zones in these places. Does he believe in investing in charter schools and the types of things that lift people up? Let's have a debate about policy. Well, they both diagnosed the problem. There's a big problem in West Baltimore, whether it's Twitter or a podium. It's the same thing.
But I will argue that when you cannot hear the inflection in someone's voice, when you cannot hear that, in the same way that I could make a comment to either one of you on Twitter that would read very differently than if I sat at a podium and said it in a microphone. You don't hear where I'm coming from in the same way that you do on social media. So I would just say to any elected official, and this is not only for President Trump, this is for everyone who holds a position of political leadership, if you are going to tweet something, once it gets out there, it sticks. And it's very hard to take that back to recontextualize.
Well, he'll be in front of a podium soon.
You have to think before you tweet. That's all. We all follow it. Just do it.
The question now is, are we going to hear about this on Tuesday night when we get to the next Democratic debates? What does Joe Biden, remember Kamala Harris made race an issue front and center in an uncomfortable way for Joe Biden. We'll see what Joe Biden has to say.